Have you ever wondered, like, how much censorship really works when it comes to social media? We hear about it all this time. But can you actually stop information from spreading when everyone's online?
It's a question a lot of people are asking, and this new study, it was done by Stockholm University. They really dug into it. They were looking at Weibo, which is basically China's answer to Twitter, and how people use it to spread news about protests, even with the government trying to control things.
Okay, so China, Weibo, protests. What makes this research so different, so important that we're making it our deep dive today?
Well, picture this. A platform goes from 0 users to, get this, 500 million in just a few years. That's what happened with Weibo, and it all went down right when these researchers were watching, between like 2009 and 2017.
It's about a social media explosion. That's like a giant experiment.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what they found, honestly, surprised a lot of people. See, most studies on social media and protests, they focus on how people organize, like using Facebook to plan a big meetup. But in China, that's almost impossible to pull off because the censorship is so tight.
So if people aren't using Weibo to plan protests directly, how are these things happening?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm.
Turns out there are two main ways. The first one, researchers called it simultaneous action. Basically, someone sees other people protesting, maybe in different places, and they think, well, if they're doing it, maybe it's safer for me to do it too.
Safety in numbers.
Yeah, it becomes this feedback loop, Social media makes it way bigger. The more people see it, the more likely they are to jump in. And the second way is even more interesting. They called it emotional contagion.
Okay, now you've got me curious. Emotional contagion. What is that?
So imagine you're angry about something. Could be anything, right? Maybe local officials are taking land, or there's been a factory accident, something like that. You're mad, but you're keeping your head down. Then you go on Weibo and you see other people letting loose that same anger, that frustration. You don't feel so alone anymore.
Right, like it's validating in a way.
Exactly. That shared anger, it can be really motivating.
So it's not even about planning the protest itself. It's more about spreading the feeling behind it.
You got it. In this study, they actually measured how fast these emotions spread. They tracked retweets, and they found that news of something happening could reach across like different industries, different parts of China, all within 2 days.
That is incredibly fast.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious, how does this play out in the real world? What's an example of this happening?
There's this one case, it's really powerful from the research. It's about a migrant worker, this was in Guangdong, who, well, he set off a bomb he had made after a fight about wages back in 2013. A terrible story. But here's the thing. The same day it happened, Weibo posts from Guangdong about the event, they just exploded. People were expressing all this anger, sadness, shock, everything. And these posts, they got retweeted like crazy in 9 other cities.
Okay, so people are talking about it online, which makes sense.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, within 48 hours of those Weibo posts blowing up, 3 of those 9 cities, they had similar protests break out, also about labor issues. Now, we can't say for sure those Weibo posts directly caused it,
But it makes you wonder.
doesn't it? That's what the researchers found so interesting. People weren't saying, hey, go copy this protest online. It was the spread of the news itself, all those raw emotions that seemed to be driving it.
That's kind of chilling when you really think about it. Like a wildfire, but for feelings, spreading online.
And it gets even more interesting when you think about how Weibo and social media in general can break down the usual barriers you see with these movements.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about the usual protest, right? Factory workers protest their wages, students protest about education, everyone kind of stays in their own lane. But Weibo, it helps spread this protest feeling across those groups.
So people from all different walks of life were connecting. Not because of their job or background, but because we were feeling that same frustration with how things are.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting because this whole unintended consequence of social media, it puts the Chinese government in a tough spot.
Okay, let's unpack that. What do you mean?
So the Chinese government, they want to use social media too, right? To understand what people are thinking, maybe even find those corrupt local officials. It's a powerful tool.
Yeah, I can see the appeal there.
For sure. But that same openness, all that information being out there, it's exactly what lets these protests spread so fast. It's like they're trying to walk this tightrope between controlling things and letting information flow.
Okay, so how do you even try to control something that powerful? I'm picturing them trying to delete these posts like whack-a-mole.
That's a pretty good analogy.
Yeah.
And it's actually even more complicated than you might think. See, in China, there are basically 2 types of censorship happening on platforms like Weibo.
Lay it on me.
All right, so first you've got what they call pre-publication censorship. Think of it like that spam folder in your email. If your post has certain words, sensitive stuff, it gets flagged. Someone has to actually look at it before anyone else sees it.
So it never even goes live.
Nope, not unless they approve it. But then there's the second type, and this is the really interesting one for what we're talking about.
Even more interesting than a superpowered spam filter. I'm all ears.
This type, the post actually does go up publicly, but there are these censors, they're working behind the scenes, constantly reading stuff. If they flag something, it gets taken down, even if it's already been shared a bunch of times.
It's like a delayed reaction.
Exactly. And that delay, it's crucial because in that time, the post could have been seen by thousands, maybe even millions of people. And that's what the researchers really wanted to figure out. How effective is this delayed censorship when information and those emotions we talked about are spreading so fast?
How they measure that? How do you even track that kind of thing?
Good question. They looked at three main things. First, how long does it take for that censorship to kick in after a post goes live? Second, they tracked how fast people were actually reading and sharing things. And then, the last piece, they tried to see how often they could grab a copy of a post before those censors took it down.
It's like a race against time. Who can get to the information first?
Exactly. And the results, they were pretty revealing. They found that about half of the posts that got flagged for this second wave censorship gone within an hour.
Okay, that seems pretty fast to me. Is that fast enough, though?
Well, remember how we were talking about the speed of those retweets? Turns out people are even faster than the censors in those first few minutes after something's posted. It's crucial.
So even if it's taken down eventually, the damage is done, so to speak. It's out there.
Exactly. And it's not just that people are seeing it. The researchers think maybe a third of the posts that get flagged, people read the whole thing before it disappears.
Wow. So even with all that effort to control what people are seeing, a good chunk of it is still getting through. It makes you wonder, like, are these protests still rare, or is this happening more than we realize?
That's the question, isn't it? And this is where it gets even wilder. See, this whole study, they were specifically looking at Weibo posts that mention what they called collective action.
What does that mean? Were they looking for posts that were, like, calling for protests?
Yeah, exactly. These are posts using super specific keywords, stuff like protests, strikes, labor disputes, things like that.
So not just general complaints online, they wanted to see if people were signaling they were ready to actually do something about it.
Exactly. And remember, even with how sophisticated China's censorship systems are, they found a lot of these posts.
Like those posts about the migrant worker in Guangdong, the ones that maybe set off those other protests.
Exactly. And there's another layer to this too. The study found that these collective action posts, they were often tapping into some pretty strong emotions. Anger, frustration, feeling like things just aren't fair.
There's that saying, right? Misery loves company.
Hmm.
If you're mad about something and you see other people feeling the same, it's like it makes your own feelings stronger, makes you want to take action.
And that's what makes this kind of information so hard to control.
Yeah.
You can try to get rid of specific posts, certain words, but you can't get rid of the feelings behind them.
So how does this all connect back to the Chinese government trying to walk that tightrope, wanting to keep things quiet and know what people are thinking?
It's a tough spot to be in, no doubt. They
Yeah.
want to have their cake and eat it too, but this research shows how hard that is in the age of social media.
So where does this leave the rest of us? I mean, China's got its own thing going on, but this whole idea of protests in the age of social media, that feels pretty global, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think about all the movements we've seen lately, all over the world. How many of those got big or even got started because of social media?
It's hard to imagine any of them taking off without it these days.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is, these movements, they often start with something very specific, very local, but they tap into this feeling that a lot of people have, like the system, whatever system it is rigged. Social media gives those people a way to find each other, and that shared frustration, that's powerful.
And when governments or whoever, when they try to shut those conversations down, it often blows up in their faces, doesn't it?
You said it. It's like trying to put out a fire by dumping gasoline on it. The harder you try to hide information, the bigger the explosion when it gets out. And believe me, in the age of social media, it's always looking for a way to get out.
It's almost like we're wired to seek this stuff out, to connect with people who get it, especially when it feels like those in charge want to keep us in the dark. This research really shows how much things have changed.
For sure. This isn't just about China anymore. It's a whole new relationship between the people in charge and everyone else. And it's forcing those in power to, rethink how they do things when information can travel so fast.
So what's the answer? Can they even control it anymore, this flow of information?
That's the million-dollar question. This research, it doesn't give us all the answers, but it shows us just how hard it is to control what people see and hear in a world where everyone's online. And it reminds us that we all need to understand these challenges, not just governments, but everyone.
Because we're all part of this giant experiment, whether we signed up for it or not.
Truth. And it's on us to figure out how to handle it, how to use it for good.
Well said. This deep dive, it's given us a lot to think about, that's for sure. It's fascinating, but also, honestly, kind of intimidating.
It's a lot to take in. But hey, knowledge is power, right? The more we understand how information moves and how it changes our world, the better we can handle whatever comes next.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Until next time, everyone, stay curious.